Welcome to episode 68 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we'll be reviewing and discussing a 2022 film titled Athena, directed by Romain Garvaz. I think that's how you pronounce his name. These French names
I don't know.
they always trip me up. I don't know about that, but
I have no
this
idea.
this film, just a little, I guess. Well, I'm interested about the style, but the little backdrop is that this film basically takes place in a French neighborhood that is predominantly, very multicultural. The setup is that unfortunately a 13-year-old boy dies in the hospital, and the belief from the community is that it was done by police because the video surfaced, and this has brought up the tension's really high between the community and the police force, and you see how it slowly erupts into flames, and all the different characters have different I would say touch points across his community, from the eldest brother who was ex-military to the other brother who was really close to this 13-year-old boy. Throughout, also there's all their various characters as well, like the police perspective. And yeah, this is a very, I would say, brave film in the sense that the topic it tackles and also how it tackles it. I do have some issues that we can get to towards maybe the end of this pod, but I thought also at a high level, stylistically, it's been a while since I've been impressed by the film. You could tell it took a lot of influence with a lot of other films that have tried similar stuff in terms of like the single frame kind of thing. But I think also how it depicted a kind of like, I don't want to say, I guess I'm going to say riot. How it depicted a riot. I've not seen like this ever in a film.
Well, it's like an uprising.
So that was very interesting too. So I'm curious what you thought of the film at a high level, but also like stylistically. Did you expect what you expected, or did it, throw you off a little bit initially? And we can take it from there. There's a lot of plot touch points we can talk about, but themes. But go ahead.
Yeah, the whole film was very much like an action packed, right? They wanted to, with all the camera angles that zooming in, panning out, just wanted to make you feel like you're right there, like kind of on the front lines with them. That's kind of the vibe I got. It reminded me a bit of like the opening scenes from The Revenant, where it's just the battles between the sort of the pioneers and the Native Americans, and you're just going and you see arrows shooting from like one person, and then it follows the next, and you're kind of panning around through all the action sequence there. I mean, I thought it was interesting style, but we can get into like some of the other I guess issues in a bit, kind of just depending on how this pod goes.
Yeah, I think a good way to start, instead of focusing on like specific plot points, because this is a very relevant film in terms of, I would say, multicultural societies like America and France and others. I think we should actually focus on the characters, their motivations, their, let's say, inner conflicts, because I think from there the story kind of drives, right? Like you can focus on the geopolitical and like we can have a lot of opinions on a lot of things, but staying focused on the film. Yeah, I'm curious, like, so Abdel, the eldest, who was served in the military, the French military, you could argue is the stereotype archetype of like what the ideal assimilated immigrant is. And it's interesting how you see that
it's like he's like the what's the term that we use in the States, or people have used, the model minority.
Yeah, the model minority. And you see that he's conflicted, right? He's conflicted to what he thinks is practical, but also the loyalties he has to his community and his family. And you see that he has relationships on both sides, and it drives him into a conflicted state. And I'm just curious, like, what did you think of his character? Did you find it realistic? Did you relate in any way?
I don't know about relating, but although, because I never served or done any military service, but yeah, although, I mean, it's kind of like he is a sort of a transition point, but for the most part, he wants to do right. He's a lot about like kind of law and order and kind of doing the right thing. And that's why he even goes in and tries to rescue the cop initially until his brother dies. I just, with his character, they didn't really go into it. That was my problem with a lot of this, is there was like a lack of really character, not just development, but really like character detail that was kind of ambiguous, and I kind of felt lacking. But what was interesting, I mean, the obvious catalyst is when his brother is basically burned alive from the Molotov cocktail, even though he was the one who was about to throw it at the police officers, which, there was just kind of a lot going on at that point. But that was definitely the switch for his motivation. I don't know. In terms of it, I just found it a little too unbelievable, that kind of switch on the dime. And there wasn't it was all of a sudden like, we're going to rescue this cop. Next sequence, they bring him in. Or next sequence, we're going to kill him. It was just, I don't know. The storyline seemed a little weak at certain points for me.
I think this movie's kind of short. I think the strength of the style.
I will tell you the other part that kind of annoyed me, because they didn't give any detail really whatsoever, which was Sebastian. He's just this dude they stow away at the beginning scenes, and then all of a sudden he's a bombs expert. I'm like, what is going on here?
Yeah, so I do agree with you that like this film, there's some things that translate to us in the States, but when I was doing some background on this, it's very geared towards. So this film had a strong reaction in France, where even the right-wing party stated that like this is our future, basically.
They said that it could lead to a lot of civil unrest. I read a little bit about that, but either way, in terms of the actual making the film a good film, I was just annoyed, because I'm like, well, who is this guy? They've never touched upon him.
Yeah, exactly. So what's implied is something that a lot of French suspect or know, is that in a lot of these, I forget what they call them. They don't call them like we do. We use the word projects. They're use
ghettos.
Something else.
They're ghettos. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but that a lot of unfortunately, terrorist sympathizers or terrorists themselves embed them, like they live in these communities too. Because what ends up happening is that they end up because they're educated versus like, maybe somebody from a foreign country. They end up learning a lot of interesting skills that they're able to translate. So Sebastian is supposed to represent how in these communities it's not so black and white, where you do have people who are expert bomb makers and are known.
But I thought Sebastian was like either like a former war veteran or like, that's where I was going with it, because he seemed like he was mentally handicapped in a way, or that's how they were treating him.
Why
did they stow him away in that room?
He has basically, from my like reading, is that this character is one of those guys on the spectrum who's really intelligent and really taken. But yes, he is basically a recognized fictional terrorist, and it's one of those things where this is why.
So he's basically an autistic terrorist, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And what's crazy, what was interesting when I was trying to get into like people who like live in France, is that like that's some of the tension, is that like I don't like because let's be honest, online forums are usually leaning one way if you go to certain places. That like, how do you, and this is probably more specific to them, because we don't actually have these debates here in the States, but like, I don't want to, like, I'll quote one writer or one post, like, I don't want to say blanket statements like all, Algerians are, anti-French and anti, the state, right? But at the same time, we do know that there have been ISIS sympathies or affiliates through these communities. Sure. Through propaganda, through the forces of whatever, right? Social media propaganda. And so like, how do you
decipher?
How do you decipher, or how do you tackle this knowing that such complexities? And yeah, I mean, obviously you can imagine led to so much like debate where like, well, if we have no good choice, maybe we do gotta shut it down and deport them all. Others were saying like, no, that's not the way. I mean, it's, not my country, so it got really heated in there, but it's an interesting dynamic, because I guess you could say in our version, it's like, do people do that with like the cartels, right? Do they just view some Latino communities as gateways to the drugs and the gangs?
Yeah,
right?
Here's some of that. Yeah, for sure.
So
I thought a lot more of the tension is just, with minority communities and police, I would say.
Yeah, here it's the different, right? That's why I say it's not easy. It's not apples to apples, right? It's a bit different. So I find that conversation interesting because it's a different dynamic that we don't talk about, but also you see that there's that same tension of the other, the unknown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but to your, I do agree with your critique though, because I did feel like unless you did this reading or you knew a lot about French society, that wasn't going to be apparent to a first time viewer. That
No,
this is a topic they tackle with. So this film, luckily, I was able to get like someone who knows a little bit more on that side of the world.
but bro, I mean, my issue is they brought him in for like 5 seconds, and he's kind of the main driver at the end for a lot of destruction.
Yeah,
it's
he's
just like it was wild.
He's to your point about the films. I think this is actually a critique I had, that the style is really addicting, but I think also the style hurts its ability to share a story.
Yeah, it's a story.
Because like you said, unless you have this other knowledge, you're not going to be able to connect these dots. And also it's used as a plot. This character uses as a plot device as one, and two, also that subcontext. This film has a lot of subcontext. Like everything I read is that like people who like live in France or like follow closely their politics and cultural issues say that there's a lot of subtone in this film that they don't expect people like us to actually get, because like another thing too is like
okay, you say that, but there was a lot of subtone in context that was hard to decipher as an outsider watching Burning, but we were able to get a lot more. I was able to get a lot more out of that film.
Well, that it's unfair to compare like one of the greatest films of the last 30. I mean, you're just like impossible standards. You call me tough, dude. Yeah, even though I this rating is, I'll give it.
Even though you agree.
Yes. I think also, again, the style, as much as I like the style of this film as well as I did Burning, I think again it goes back to it. This is a good example of how
I did feel that this, like, I got kind of tired of the style towards the second half, if I'm being honest.
It's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
The I think what I like about this film topic point with the style is that this is one of the clear examples to me how like style can either hinder or change how you tell a story.
Sure.
Because I feel like you only have certain tools when you're doing it this way, and it's like I said, how do you keep the adrenaline going and still show your points in this kind of style? And I think this is
hard
really
to
hard.
do.
Yeah, I give credit to the filmmaker in trying, but it seemed kind of impossible, and I think
there are different unique ways to like storytell, though. I mean, one of the most unique ways, I'm sure you've seen this film, was Memento, right, where they tell two converging stories from like before and after an event and kind of bridge it together.
My only issue now with Christopher Nolan, this is another side tangent, is like he's dipping into that too much these days.
But, yeah, fair. But I mean, it was just my point of bringing in another style that I thought worked pretty well in the beginning. Whereas this one, I was just like, an action-packed jam. I was like, whoa, there's just a lot going on, but it comes at the cost, I feel like, of a lot of character development.
I think it does too. I think that's actually a criticism I've heard from others who have seen it, and also what I read online is that, I even quote like somebody I know that watched it, and she told me that like her issue with the film, like it was a solid film, but like she actually felt like none of the characters felt like they felt like caricatures of the stereotypes and archetypes of those supposed people that you are in the media and stuff. Yeah. And so that's why
there's no redeemable quality into the very older brother who was a drug dealer. Right. I mean, like it was very minimal. I think that's also an issue with dubbing. I just couldn't quite buy his characters like super well. I don't know what it was. I think it was kind of some of the delay in the dubbing versus his facial reactions.
I watched the subs, but I prefer to. I'm a subtitle ever since I got.
Yeah, I'm gonna sub it because like it was that was part of I think what was ruining my experience.
The moving on to the I think there's really three characters. I guess there's four really to talk about, which is the Kareem, right? Kareem is the younger brother was closer to the 13-year-old kid that died. I think I'm pretty sure I remember this correctly. And then there's also Jerome, and then there's the other drug dealer brother. But so we'll talk about those four, and then we can maybe elaborate on other topics. But I guess what'd you think of Kareem, his arc that ended kind of midway through the film, as you hinted, or not hinted, you stated, and I guess what did you feel like he was misguided in his rage, or do you think,
Well,
did he have some points? Or
I think what they wanted to highlight with this character is just that there's a lot of sense of despair within those communities, and they don't feel like they're being heard. And this was Kareem's way of trying to make the outside French society actually hear him. I don't think he felt like he had any other option. That's kind of what I gathered by that.
Yeah, my sense was he was representing like that anger of like, I feel like I have, like you said, I have no other recourse, and this is it. Like I'm going out this way.
Absolutely.
And because I think each brother has they're making their own subcontext statement, right? Like the oldest is somebody that's
decisions.
Not decision, but like the subtext, right? Like the oldest brother, like you said, is the model minority. The Kareem
no, that's the second oldest brother. The oldest brother's a
drug dealer. Yeah, sorry. The oldest brother's the drug dealer, right? And you could argue he's the one that has like gone to like the side of like, okay, this is the best I'm gonna do. You're right though. It's the because they all have the same mom, but I think different dad, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he's the drug dealer. And you could argue he's the one that's just making it work via the dark channels, which is another route, unfortunately, for a lot of minorities, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have let's say the model minority son, and then you have the youngest that died, and you have the Kareem, who is probably this young ideologically driven character. Mm-hmm. That feels like France will never have a place for him, and as he in that anger, because the other two, you could say the other two older brothers, they found their place, even if it's like not perfect, right? One is in the underworld, one's in the military, right? Yep. And it's very interesting, and that's why I agreed with this this person that said that like a lot of the characters felt archetypes versus actual characters, which I think is a valid critique of this film, actually, because I think this film is actually trying to touch upon something that I've noticed in French cinema of I would say since 2019. There's a lot more films that are a little more bold in talking about this issue that's happening in France, where you have entire communities that the police don't even go to because they're run by the immigrant communities now.
Well, wasn't that a big issue with like a match?
The Champions League final, yeah, exactly what happened. That people who knew French, who know France, knew that like that wasn't going to be a good venue to have the game, because part of that area is run by not French, not the French government doesn't have control of that area, which has proven to be the case. The British learned the hard way. And yeah, I mean, I think the people in England were shocked to learn that like you could be on the street going to a soccer match and be robbed, like just straight up robbed. And the police are not even going to go in those neighborhoods and this is something that's been building over for, I would say, 20 or 30 years, because there's some early mid 90s films that tackle this, but it's just gotten more and more, not just in the limelight, but more tenuous as like, we've seen the growth of like, well, at the time, ISIS is kind of, got shut down by U.S. military operations. But, when that was at the peak, it was really a flashpoint. But now it's still in the undercurrent, which this film I think is trying to touch upon, that like these communities could be explosive at any moment, really. But bringing it back to the States, right? Like I think in the States there's also like there is that I would say subcurrent tension as well, especially like you said with the police force, which is something that we'll talk about with Jerome here. That was the other interesting character, the naive cop. That he was doing his job, and I thought those scenes were actually, the cinematography of those scenes were pretty cool.
Oh, I like that when he was trying to escape.
Yeah, but also when they go with the riot gear and all the fire and the motorcycles, that was pretty sick, dude. Like I was just like, dang, this looks like a war zone, which I think that was the point. Yeah, that was sick. I was just like, this is good. But yeah, I
confusion and chaos. They made it feel like it was a riot or a war zone. Did a good job with that.
Yeah,
like a lot of the aesthetics.
What I wanted to ask you actually was something that I think is part of the undercurrent of this film is, we're presented initially that the cops killed. I want to talk before the ending, right? The cops killed this kid. The cops are adamant that it wasn't them. Mm-hmm. When you're watching this film, I'm just curious your opinion. Like, did you did you initially believe the police, or did you believe the what was being circulated and like, you know, the other character, the characters in the neighborhood? Because that's interesting. I thought that was an interesting how like I'll give credit to the writer and director that like in the end they tied it to like maybe the narratives we believe aren't always so true.
Sure.
But like initially, who did you kind of like, who did you think was telling the truth or not? You know?
It's hard to tell, and I think that's why I wanted to wait till the end. I didn't really develop it. I'm like, okay, let's just kind of see where this goes.
I'll tell you from my perspective. Initially, I didn't buy the police. I was just like, no, they're probably just covering up because I'm kind of used to that. But you know, when I saw the ending, I had more doubts. You know, of like, well, maybe I was wrong.
I think what clouds my mind with that is, well, this is going to get really political, I guess. But even
this feels political, so it's okay.
Yeah, I think it's just you know, I never truly buy like what you initially hear or what's initially suspected until like all the facts came out. And that's kind of like how I felt after hearing the Rittenhouse case. Now I'm not justifying like everything he did, but just how tainted and how the facts were kind of distorted, right, on what was initially released was totally different from what came out at the end. And so that's why I think with that case, that kind of like informs how I view things like going forward, if that makes sense. So even with this, when I was like, okay, like kind of let's see how this plays out. They're saying one side is saying it's cops, one side it's not, but I'm sure they're gonna kind of explain it at the end.
Yeah,
which they did. You've learned it's a far right military group. Or a far right group who's posing as police to beat it up to incite like a civil unrest, which makes sense. I can buy that. I'm sure there's some groups here in the U.S. who would want to do the same.
Yeah, and what I found fascinating is when I was reading some discussion forums is that there were some people that said like, see, it's funny how people can. This is what I'll give. This is a plus point to the film. People can take this ending or this storyline and have again maybe to the point of the film. Right, like you believe your narrative, right? So there was posts that were saying, "Hey, the director trying to say like you just said it, right? Like you gotta let all the facts play out. You can't overreact just because of media reports or social media." And other people would be like, "Yes, I agree, but you're missing." They would say, in their opinion, the point of the film is that may be true, but the tone of the police the whole time is a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding. They thought it was a closed issue. They're like, "Oh, it wasn't us. So why are you all complaining?" But like they're not looking at it. It's just that's just a flashpoint.
Well,
like, there's other issues in the community.
This is one event, all right, that's led to this one point.
Exactly. And like it was interesting to see that tension of like, well, no, like the police were like
what I was talking about was just within this specific case that it was the boiling point. I'm not talking about everything that led up to that.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to see how different people like interpreted it, like the police being kind of like, not the perpetrators, but still there was, again, some people felt innocent. Yeah, some people felt like, hey, that's not the point. Like it's a wider thing, and others were like, no, this should have been. This just they.
I wouldn't go that far.
But it was just interesting to see like people saw what they wanted to see, right? Like, course, okay, yeah. Like it's the police weren't involved, so like I don't want to say the racist language I've read, but like these immigrants shouldn't be doing what they're doing. They should be grateful that they're here.
Well, it's just like when you watch The Wire, right? I mean, everyone who sees it, they see what they want to see in it.
Exactly. So I found that fascinating, just on a human level. And it's I thought it was very enlightening in that regard. That like we dog on I know Americans like to dog on themselves and each other, but this was a very it's not just here, right? It's other places too that have these kind of dynamics where
a lot of issues.
Yeah, they don't really know how to solve them. There's no clear path,
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So it's good to see just from because I'm an outsider to this society and culture, right? So it's interesting seeing as an outsider how others might view our issues, and our like whatever that's guns or politics or whatever. So
absolutely,
because like there were some things I struggled to, like I had to do some reading on like I said, the Sebastian like archetype and other things that like this is something that we don't unfortunately deal with, or we're not concerned of that, like even though we were concerned after 9/11, but that we're not as concerned anymore about it sells in the Muslim community, but that's something that they actually are very concerned with, and they're also concerned with like how these neighborhoods aren't integrating at all, that they practice their own law and they do their own thing, and like and how they even get some supplies is through black market, via the other foreign countries that they have connections to. So
Interesting.
yeah, it is very fascinating. And so yeah, it's just a different world. And obviously I don't live there, so I can't speak to all the inner dynamics, but it is interesting. It reminds me of when you were showing me that video of that guy that how the drugs come through Washington Heights in New York. I was just like, oh, interesting. Yeah. It's a different world, right? Like you're just
Chris, back in the day.
back in the day. Right.
That's what they were saying back in the 80s and 90s.
I just don't think those doors close. Anyways, they might move, but I don't think they close. Anyways, back in the day. Okay, we'll stay back in.
Well, that's what they said in the video.
Okay.
Anyway,
well, it's like me saying back in the day, drugs moved through Mexico. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean it's just interesting because we definitely. And you talk to a lot of people, and they sort of have this perception of the U.S. as just here I think it's because we're so isolated. We tend to think that we're the only ones who really have issues like this. But I mean, you start to see media that portrays issues from other countries, and such that, like from this film to like say Top Boy is another like good example of that.
Yeah, too. Exactly. And I think the good thing about this kind of media, even though I know it's indie film, I know it's niche, is that I realized the importance of films recently when I was abroad, and I told you this already, that somebody asked me something I've never been asked before, but it's because his only perception of the States was through the news or through film. And he asked me, like, is there many poor people in this country? And I was just like in shock. And I was just like, that's me asking of like, do you guys play soccer? Like, of course, like there is, but he's so used to his dynamic because he's a poor Argentinian that like he can't, and his perception of the States is that, all these Argentinians even want to, go to the States themselves. And,
well, a lot of people think that like the U.S. is like based on media that it's paved and the streets are paved in gold.
Exactly.
We do a good job of marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, whoa, like parts of like certain urban cities in the U.S. can be like Fallujah.
Yeah, like, and look,
basically bombed and hollowed out.
Yeah, when I was in Colombia many moons ago, I remember the Colombian guy saying, like, he went to the States illegally. He did the thing that people don't talk about, came on a tourist visit and just stayed. People forget that a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
It's not just the border crossings. Just have to emphasize that because it annoys me. Anyways, but he said, like, it was something that it was in Spanish too. I just remember like thinking like, wow, like he had like that moment where like the reality check, right? Like he was excited and he thought, like you said, it would be a little easier, but he was living deep into Queens, and he said it was actually probably it was not that pleasant. He said the only thing that was really worth it was that even though he was working like a couple kitchen jobs, the dollars, I mean, he said he still comfortably, he comfortably was able to bring that back. And like, that's the one thing that he did enjoy was like, yeah, I was maybe poor in America, but like once I saved enough and got back here and at Medellin, like now I can do this tourist job as a side gig and not feel like, yeah. And also he said to help him practice his English. So that's why he has a good gig as a tour guide. Yeah. So he was just like, yeah, in the end, like it was a good trip, but like, it's not my culture. It was really hard to like, meet, I mean, he met other Colombians, but it was hard to like expand out of that. And like, he just said, I might as well just live in where I grew up, cause he was born in Medellin, and I understood that, but it was interesting how he had like a certain perspective, like, oh, okay, I'm going to come to America. I'm going to just make so much money and I'm going to maybe stay there or maybe move. And he just ended up coming home after he just got enough. And going back to the Argentinian guy I talked to, yeah, like he just he just knew what the movies told him, and
dude, like when your only avenue is just what goes on. I mean, I would say people are much more aware today because they have access through sites like YouTube where you can see videos. If you want to go see, like, say, the streets of Baltimore, there's people who go and literally film documentary style street. I've seen some of these, and it's like, whoa, like some of the areas are pretty rough, right? And so a lot of that is more open access, but unless you're looking for that, you're not going to see it. In, like, I think in a lot of these countries, still typical Hollywood media dominates, and
exactly.
We tend to not always explore sort of the darker, bad sides of the U.S.
And you gotta remember, this guy's a tour guy himself, so like his perception is warped by people who are affluent.
Yeah, money.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of like I finished that podcast that we both listened to with a well-known journalist now, who's Indian. I mean, that's my only. I didn't want to say the name, but he was mentioning the book by Things Fall Apart by Charles Murray. I actually ended up taking the quiz he talked about.
Of course you did.
Of course I did, yeah. And the quiz really did peg me. It was like I'm not so much. It was a bit disheartening because I guess I'm not as far away from the bubble as I thought I was. Because it pegged me as somebody that like had middle class parents, but is no longer. I'm gonna just say that on record. I guess
global elite.
I'm not gonna go that far. I wish I was a billionaire, but anyways, but I'm just a good working stiff. Anyways,
wait, Chris, can we get a tour of your apartment? And mind you, this is in a really good area of New York City.
No, we're good on that. Anyways, but like it pegged me as like like that tier that I think because I try to do the test as honest as possible. It had me in that tier where like I wasn't like some people I meet, they're like really in their bubble, but I also was removed enough away from. So I was like in that tier, which made me think that like any of my own children would be definitely further down that list, which is a bit of problematic for me. Because I do agree with
that's why you gotta send them to Mexicali on the summers so that they understand a little bit.
Yeah, after one summer, they're gonna be like, "I'm not." I want real vacations like my friends do in Hawaii. You
ever see those Instagram reels? What my friends think it's like going to Mexico during the summers, and it's like them at Cancun and like Cabo, and it's like what it's really like in the rancho somewhere, just like hauling hay.
And it's like hot as hell, dude.
There's just Tejana hats everywhere.
The real way to do that video is like what gringos do in Mexico and what other real Mexicans do in Mexico. But but my point there, the wrap up this point is that I lost my train of thought, but that it's easy to like have this again going back to the film, which I think is one of the strong themes of the film, is that it's easy to stay wrapped in your view. Because I think a lot of the characters, in the end, their own downfall is they have a certain perspective of the others or how they view the world, whether that's the police, whether that's Abdel, whether that's the drug guy who's very cynical, whether that's Kareem. And they get so fixated on it that becomes their downfall, Mm-hmm. And I think that's the message I took away from the film, that in the end, you can have your perspective. It might even be the right perspective, but it's not the only perspective. And you have to be aware of that. Because I think a lot of people end up like, right, a lot of the characters' conflicts, like, when they argue, it's like, well, how come you can't see what I see? They're like, no, like, they're so fixated, right? Like, especially when the brothers conflict early on, right? Like, the older brother's like, you're going about it the wrong way. Calm down. The other one's like, no, like, they kill my brother. It's over. Like, I'm done with this. Like we're making a statement, and like you could both see the rationales, but because they cannot walk in the other shoes, they can't disassociate. They can't cross that bridge. And in the end, this film is actually tragic, right? Like in the end, if you look from the perspective of that mother, I mean, in the end, she lost all her kids.
She lost everybody.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if she's gonna cope or does the cycle of hate continue? Who knows? But it is a very somber film if you really look at how all the characters.
There's nothing uplifting about this movie.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I saw a lot of.
All right, show me the upliftingness. Where was it, Chris?
Well, unfortunately, when
the upliftingness was just how well that Sebastian made bombs.
No. Like I'm going to tell you some posts I read that were saying like, yeah, like the police did their job and good thing that cops survived. No, I'm seriously. Okay. I read that stuff.
Okay.
I mean, I have to share what I read. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the cops survived. Okay.
And because let's be honest, in this film, that you're gonna get both spectrums, right? You're gonna get people who are, let's say more.
Yes. I'm talking about from an outsider's perspective, not someone who has direct ties to France. It was tragic.
Okay. Yes, from a human perspective, I agree with you. I'm just giving you all the information.
Yes, I know, dude. I live in a polarized country too. Yes, I understand how people's sentiments play out.
Yeah, I like how you're so annoyed by that. You're like, man,
it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Are you kidding?
These are the things I had to read, dude. I know you've been like, I'm not reading this anymore.
No, I'm not.
But that was some of the takes I had to read. Yeah. And actually, this is the problem with controversial. I'm gonna say controversial social topic filmmaking, right? That it was so obvious that like certain people are taking this film and they're saying like, see, this is why XYZ racism, right? Or like why we need to like, back the police more. And it's something that we see here, right, in our own version, right, in the States. And then you have the other side as well.
But that's
right?
the whole point. What I was saying is everyone, when it comes to a lot of these social issues, everyone always jumps to conclusions immediately. And that, like, they don't always get it right because their like minds are already made up and clouded with judgment. That was my point with the Rittenhouse case.
And I think that's the point of this film too, to the credit of the film. That's one of the stronger points of the film. Even though I think it's such a hard thing to tell, because I already, like I told you, when I read these things, I already saw that like there are a lot of people that got that, and there's a lot of people that got what they wanted to see and hear. So, and actually, maybe one of the dangers, and this is the left's critique I was reading of this film. When I say left, I mean like more film critic sites lean a certain way. Let's just be honest. Sure. Is that their fear, and I can see why they thought this, because again, I told you I read those not so great posts, that in a certain way you could view this film as like a way of rationalizing your deepest fears of the immigrant community.
The others.
Yeah, and that's not healthy. But then I was just like, but if you don't ever tackle the issues, you're not going to make any progress.
Well, if you don't talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. But if you only want to talk about it in a certain way, right, which we know we suffered through our own version of that here in the States too. So
what was it, about 3 years ago?
Yeah. But even recently, with the whole grand jury trial, I had people message me saying like, it's this is a witch hunt.
Trial? Oh, of course. I think I know who you're talking about.
And then on the other side, I had people say like, we have to postpone our plans because I'm afraid there's going to be riots in Manhattan. Those are the spectrums I dealt with. And I think this film reminded me of that, like
riots in Manhattan.
Yes,
Are you serious?
There was concerns of that. Yes, I'll tell you off the record, but yes, there was. Plans got postponed because of that, because they were very worried that it was going to be storming the castle 2.0. Just like, how do you deal with this, Chris? Look at your face, dude. How do you deal with it?
Because I know both sides. I know both of these people. That's why. Oh God.
Yeah.
There's no sanity anymore.
Well, no, you haven't met the other person, but yeah.
I met their archetype.
Yeah. So and you know me, I have to. I'm a good politician, so I'm going to say that. Anyway. But yeah, so like the wrap up my point here is that like, yeah, like you see that this film, the potential is that you take something meaningful from it maybe you haven't before, even though I think you and I already know these topics, but others, I see the fears. Why? Because you start seeing what you want to see, and now that just becomes, now you take the clips you want and you put that in your little promotional video, of whatever political party, and it becomes what you want to hear and see, right? And I think this is a problem that we're having in general in our societies, that we're seeing and hearing what we want to hear versus having actual uncomfortable conversations and understanding that, like, for instance, like there's been a lot more talk about male loneliness and all this stuff recently. And I'm not shocked because I knew this was happening, but the pushback has been very interesting to read and see, because, a lot of women don't think.
Go
ahead. No, I was going to say that. I'm just saying that there's another example of that kind of dynamic, but, go ahead.
Well, no, what I was going to say is just changing people's minds are hard if we're trying to like tackle things that they already have deeply embedded in their beliefs. From what I've seen, the only person who kind of strikes it at an interesting way that I see is kind of effective, I think I've sent you some videos of him, was the dude Peter Boghossian, who goes to like different like schools or campuses, and he just kind of tries to challenge them a bit.
I thought you were going to say the greatest moderator in all of podcasts.
No, come on. Let's not go there. But no, but with you know who I'm talking about, Boghossian. He'll have his epistemology. He'll try to like have people. He doesn't even like have a debate. It's more like try to ask questions on like what they believe or like how strongly they feel on it, and like what evidence they would need to see that would be sufficient enough for them to change their position. Like what would they need? I think that's the only way to really try to tackle things like that.
What I like about his approach is that he tries not to judge their position, but his follow-up questions do challenge them. And what I've learned,
try to,
yeah, and I think why I think especially because he goes to campuses who are so, we know how they are, like very.
It's not just there. He's done this in like just street public too.
But I think the ones I've seen that are really visceral with the campus ones is because
like when he went to Portland.
Yeah, like you don't want to be challenged on your points because you think you're so certain. So yeah, I guess we could slowly wrap up. Is there anything else you want to talk about in this film specifically? If not, like we can
I
wrap
don't
up
think so.
final thoughts and then we can little off the record conversations. But but yeah, I think I let you go first with any like final thoughts and ratings you have. So
Sure. I thought the style was pretty interesting. It was very action packed throughout. I do agree with you. I loved that scene where like the police are going up the stairs and they're filing in formation, and then you see because they're not sure what to expect. You know, it's dark out and there's a lot of smoke, and then all of a sudden they get surrounded and scattered. So it did make you feel. And I did like how they pan to different police officers, so you see kind of their reactions. You know, kind of like, oh, we're not in a great situation here, right? Because they're surrounded, they don't really know how to deal with this stuff. So I thought some of the cinematography and aesthetics were really cool to see. I thought the character development was, and I've already made this point several times, was lacking. I did kind of get tired of the style. I said halfway. I would say more like the effort towards the final third. Yeah, I think that this film could have been better if it tweaked or it went into detail or they cut out some of the action parts, because we kind of got the idea it's a riot, right? But they never really went into like very strong character development, and I think that was my biggest issue. So I got to give the film a 7 out of 10.
yeah, I think I agree with actually a lot of your points. I ended up giving this film a 7.5, and the main reason is because I ended up realizing that if you want to do the film this style, and that's why I say I'm looking forward to maybe a film that maybe does this kind of style perfectly, but I think it's going to be really hard because I think you have to commit to it, right? So if you break out of it, like, does that ruin the film? It crossed my mind the other day, like, does it ruin the film even worse if you break out of it? Because I do agree with all your points. It's just I was thinking like how I would do it if I was
maybe you don't use this style of filmmaking for something that is very complex.
That's fair, but
these are complex issues they're trying to deal with, and
yeah, but but also as a filmmaker, you also want to do something. I appreciate that it was a bit bold, but maybe sometimes, like you said, you can end up with the film that causes more problems for people than. I'm saying this based on what I read too, because I'm telling you, to your point, a lot of it was very. I mean, I should have been shocked, but I'm always shocked when I read.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but like, because you're right. Like, there's films that I've truly enjoyed, like Boys in the Hood, that like I felt like did it close to perfect. This film, I agree with you. There are issues where if you don't have, like, let's say a good, not just cinema background, but like if you're self-aware, I'm just gonna say that if you're not self-aware, you're gonna watch this film and you're gonna see whatever you want to see, and then you're gonna go and post on social media, look, this is what happens if we let too many immigrants come. Or
but more of my point was just even the flip on the dime, like all of a sudden his brother dies and then the other one comes and all of a sudden he beats the other brother to death. I'm like, okay, this is like such an absurd like transition.
And it's because I think it's almost like the double-edged sword of the style, right? It at times is brilliant, and at times it's like
unbelievable, really. Not
believable. Exactly. It's just like you're up and down. There is no like this. It's just like like it is. And that's why I say, like, I don't know, like, if you could really you could probably do I haven't seen that war film. What's it called? Like Battle
1919 or something like that.
1919. Yeah. And it's a similar, because I was reading, it's a similar style, and maybe that works better because it's like it's a war movie. It's single, like, and it's that kind of journey. To your point, this topic being so bold, and let's be honest, like something that is a tough.
It kind of like in terms of the style of film and kind of the single frame and panning out, Birdman did it better.
Yeah, but Birdman is not trying to tackle like these type of issues.
Oh, it tackled pretty heavy issues.
A
lot of dialogue. But what I'm saying is, even the focus, a single lens falling around it, you felt like you were right there.
Sorry, it wasn't action based. It talked a lot of issues, but it wasn't action based. There was a lot of like you said, dialogue.
Yeah, when you say it didn't tackle, what film were you watching that
I'm sorry. I mean, it was tackling different issues. Like, it was tackling issues that were still good, and I love interpersonal. I'm just saying it wasn't tackling like race, culture, political ones,
not societal issues, really.
Yeah. Even though I would argue that the whole let's see what the reviewer was definitely societal. But anyways,
Oh, wow. The critic scene was brilliant.
I was love that one. Anyways, but I don't want to deviate too much. But yeah, I gave it a 7.5 because I felt like I had the same concerns. I enjoyed. I enjoyed this movie so much I watched it twice. So like, so I was.
See, I didn't have that feeling for this film.
I will say this. There's again, as you know, there's always a personal bias to my film enjoyment. I really did like. I saw parts of myself in Kareem and also in the Abdel guy. That's what I liked about this film too. You know, there was a time where I felt like I was a revolutionary, and I thought like we needed to bring it all down.
And look where you're at now.
And now I feel like I'm more like Abdel, except without the ending. Anyways, like now I'm like, we need to see the whole picture.
Let's not tear the whole system down now, guys. Come on, let's calm down.
Let's tell them the system.
Like, did you see the Tim Dillon pod last week?
Which one? I saw part of it.
Where he was talking about Silicon Valley Bank's downfall. He's like,
yeah.
I'm one of the good ones. Don't come for my money.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's like, I'm new rich. I'm not trying to take it like these guys are. But
exactly.
It's all satire.
It is. Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah, I did see that part. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's how I'll leave it. Like, you know, this film, I think it's actually a film a lot of people could enjoy, but I don't know if I could really recommend it to people who I felt they were just going to see what they wanted to see. I think it's important to see all the perspectives in this film. So.
Sure. I gotcha. I agree.
Right.
Anyway, with that, I think that concludes this week's episode of the Critical Fools podcast. If you enjoyed our commentary on this, please like and subscribe to our channel, and let us know any suggestions for movies that we should be watching down in the comments.